This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Howdy.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Bryan.
Hello. How are you?
I'm doing well, and let's go ahead and get our Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa's out of the way. This is be our last episode before those holidays all get kicked off, because I think this is going to drop on the 20th. And Hanukkah will be on, well, I guess I won't. Hanukkah's already started by the time we drop this, because I think it starts on the 18th.
I believe that's correct.
We hope you're having a great holiday, whatever it is you're celebrating.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for listening, folks. Hope you're having a good holiday season, and thanks for your notes and your comments and your likes and subscribes. Keep it up, please. You can go to dreamidiots.com and please go to us, our page on whatever app, platform you're listening to us on. Shoot us 5 stars, and if you want to reach out and say hello, give us a curse word to check out. You can reach us at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail.com.
And it's episode 49. So, Bryan, you get to start us off, unless you got some updates for us.
Just had the one update, just because there's one thing that I was gonna reference, only because it is still timely. This episode is coming out on the 20th, and if you are needing a last minute gift idea, in last week's show we talked about the caganer, the Christmas pooper, in the back of nativity scenes in Catalan. If you go to caganer.com, caganer.com, apparently this Christmas pooper character is a thing, because you can go to this website and you can get Bert and Ernie pooping. You can get Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Vladimir Putin, Alexander Zelensky, all as a caganer. You can go, if you click on music, you can get Michael Jackson, John Lennon, Freddie Mercury, or David Bowie. You can get anyone from the cast of Game of Thrones as a Christmas pooper. And you can even get Super Mario, Bugs Bunny, Sonic the Hedgehog, and even Optimus Prime squatting, taking a dump. That one I have issue with, because I'm pretty sure there's no.
It's just an oily lug nut on the ground.
I have to say, okay. No, I don't think that's one, but whatever. But anyway, folks seem to enjoy the caganer, and so it's a little Christmas gift idea. I'm trying to imagine parents out there with a child that's a huge fan of, I don't know, Pickett, Black Widow, or Wonder Woman. Last minute stocking stuffer. Okay. Anyway, but I digress. So we're getting into my story first this week, and I sent you a couple images via email.
You did.
Go ahead and click on number 1.
Right, I recognize her.
Who is that? Describe what it is you're looking at.
It's the famous "We Can Do It." It's a blue word balloon with white text, a woman with polka dot kerchief around her black mane of hair. She's rolling up her right sleeve, and it's almost like she's giving you the high sign, the old bastafazoo there.
Right.
And it says War Production Coordinating Committee. Is that who we know as Rosie the Riveter?
Rosie, as you rightly said, the Riveter.
Okay,
actually,
yeah.
Well, that's who everyone thinks is pictured there, but the reality is that's not Rosie the Riveter. Turns out you are not correct. That poster you mentioned down there at the bottom, it has a little W logo.
Mm-hmm.
That poster was up for only 10 days or so. It was part of a collection, series of 42 posters that hung exclusively in Westinghouse facilities across America in 1943. So that's what the W logo that is there at the bottom. It was actually part of an anti-union effort. But the reason you and I know it is because it was rediscovered in the 80s and it's basically been part of our consciousness ever since. Sort of iconic image, and it had this new lease on life, but really not until the 80s was when it really kind of came back to the forefront. I've always sort of weirdly felt a kind of a kinship to that imagery because my grandmother actually worked in the Bethlehem Steel Yard in Boston during World War II for, I'm not sure for how long, but for a period of time. She was, in fact, a riveter, which I always thought was sort of cool. But the Rosie the Riveter mystique imagery was portrayed a number of different ways across the country and in Britain and indeed in Australia, and it was critical to raising up the labor force, because World War II was a total war, and we needed every able-bodied human being that could to step up and be a part of the machine that was the war engine. The Rosie the Riveter, the name actually came from, there was a song that came out in 1942 by Red Evans and John Jacob Lieb. And this song was heavily circulated and used quite a bit. And we're actually going to listen to a snippet of it here.
Woo!
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the riveter, keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage. Sitting up there on the fuselage, that little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie, the riveter, Rosie's got a boy.
The lyrics are, that little frail can do more than a male, Rosie the Riveter. So this was, sort of this female empowerment movement in a number of respects, because for the first time ever, in the period prior to this, during the Great Depression, for women that had jobs, a great number of them lost their jobs due to the Depression. But as part of the war effort, there were a number of women either coming back to jobs for the first time in a long time, or perhaps for the first time ever. The numbers associated with this I couldn't find consistent numbers on this, but it's clear there was a huge increase, according to the Encyclopedia of American Economic History. So Rosie the Riveter really inspired this movement. In 1944, there had been an increase from 12 million to 20 million of female workers. So 8 million more women working by the end of the war than there had been at the beginning of the war. By 44, 1.7 million unmarried men between the ages of 20 and 34 worked in the defense industry. But there were a total of 4.1 million unmarried women in that same age range, showing 2.5 to 1 ratio of women to men, simply because of this need and sort of this initiative. This was really the first time ever that women were encouraged in this way to think of themselves as being able-bodied or as being equal, in this way. It really had a profound impact on gender roles, and this notion that women couldn't possibly do what men could do was really eroded. So in this context, I'm sort of blown away by the fact that in 2022, the fact that even now people on the right are not exactly encouraging when it comes to letting women, or encouraging women, or thinking women are able when it comes to STEM education, for instance. I mean, what could be more technical and more difficult and require more brawn than building planes and ships? But it's clear that the effort of women in this country, it's not that it was critical. We could not have won the war without the profound contributions that were made during this time. In 1942, just in the first half of that year, the estimates of the proportion of jobs that were deemed to be acceptable for women, employers increased that acceptability ratio from 29% to 85%. So basically any job that that they had were deemed to be acceptable. And one of the interesting, I guess, peculiar side effects, or hard to know how to describe this, but a staggering number of African American women went to work as well. And this was the first time in American history where Black and white women worked together side by side. And so social barriers broke down. And there was finally, really for the first time, perhaps, this recognition that diversity is a good thing. So anyway, all kinds of really positive and interesting side effects here. Go ahead and open image number 2.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. We've got a woman in a fully denim suit with a riveter machine sitting on top of something, eating her lunch. She's got a lunch pail. It says Rosie on it. She's got a sandwich in her hand. Looks like a pretty good sandwich. She's got welder's goggles or protection goggles over her eyes because she's taking a break, and she's got the American flag behind her,
right,
kind of as a full background. Also a Rosie the Riveter image that I recognize as well. I've seen this before.
Yeah, so this image actually was titled Rosie the Riveter, is a painting by Norman Rockwell, which you probably recognize. The actual full version of this was it was the cover of the Saturday Evening Post for Memorial Day, May 29th of 1943. So, she's a brawny woman, but she's taking a break. She has her rivet gun. If you'll notice, I'm not sure whether the image is cropped off. She's actually standing on her feet are on a copy of Mein Kampf down at the bottom.
Oh yeah, I see that. Yeah.
And so this was definitely a war message, right? The American flag in the background, and again, this was a call to service. She's wearing all these military buttons. Rockwell's actual inspiration for the painting was that of the prophet Isaiah. I mean, Michelangelo's Isaiah from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And so, if you actually compare those two paintings side by side, they are incredibly similar. It's sort of interesting. But he did actually have Rockwell actually had a model who posed for this. She posed for photographs. He always worked from photos because he was such a slow painter. But his model was at the time a 19-year-old woman named Mary Doyle Keefe. She was a telephone operator who lived nearby. She was not a riveter at all, and Rockwell painted his Rosie as a larger woman than she was in real life, and he apparently had to call her later on to apologize. And then apparently in one of Doyle's obituaries years later, it was recounted that 24 years after Doyle had posed for the photographs, Rockwell sent Doyle a letter calling her the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and apologizing for the hefty body in the painting. Quote, "I did have to make you into sort of a giant," unquote. So yeah, she's definitely strong. Apparently he just kind of shrunk her head to make the body look bigger than
you can see that. You can see the proportions are a little off with the head and the body. Yeah.
Right.
Which is unusual for Rockwell too.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Rockwell's Rosie was seen less and less over the years. There was a copyright dispute with the Rockwell estate, and so that's why that imagery kind of fell by the wayside, and why that first picture I sent you, with the yellow background, most people sort of viewed that as being Rosie the Riveter, even though she's not. The original painting was actually sold at Sotheby's in 2002 for $5 million.
Wow.
And it's actually now in the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, that bastion of art that is Arkansas. Whatever. But apparently the model, Ms. Keefe, was actually present in 2002 when the painting was sold.
Very cool.
Yeah. And she's actually interviewed at one point and said, "I didn't expect anything like this, but as the years went on, I realized the painting was famous." And she died in 2015 in Connecticut at the age of 92. So
Uh,
go ahead.
I also like the fact that in the photo, her eyes are kind of shut,
Hmm.
like she's not like she's asleep, but like she's kind of like I don't know, it's a very natural look, like she's kind of in mid chew, kind of looking down. I don't know, it's a very
Yes.
cool look she's got on her face. Like she's
Yeah.
just
We working, but she seems very, the character, the depiction there, she seems very much at ease to me.
yeah.
Very, yeah, very comfortable, which I think is the intent
Yeah.
of the painting. Yeah. So, Rosie the Riveter and her lasting impact. There are just a ton of books and documentaries and various ways in which this depiction has been honored and lauded and held up in interesting ways. Rose City is the nickname for Portland, Oregon.
Hmm.
The Rose City Riveters are the fan club for the Portland Thorns women's soccer league team. And Portland's called Rose City because there were 30,000 women who worked in the shipyards in Portland during World War II. I knew Portland was called the Rose
I
City. I had no idea why.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That's
So there you go.
wow,
Uh,
cool.
so by the end of World War II, all these men are coming back and are taking these jobs back over. And obviously the need for ships and planes starts to go away, although a staggering number of these women, dozens to hundreds certainly stayed on and worked in these, in various jobs because of their experience having worked as a riveter. But that societal pressure certainly did kick in, because you have to go home and have babies and bake pies, and those gender roles kind of kicked back in a little bit. But there were lots of women who stayed and worked, and this was the launching pad for a lengthy, fulfilling career in a male-dominated field. And I mean, this is, in my mind, this is probably the first event in American history where women were seen as acceptable human beings if they were unmarried and had jobs and money of their own. Prior to that, you went to school and you certainly went through high school, but then you were looking for a husband to get married, etc. And that was that was the American life up until this point in time. And strangely, though, I mean, it's clear that they're rich people, industrialists, were a bit at cross purposes, because that original Rosie the Riveter poster was part of an anti-union message. It's clear that a lot of rich people made a lot of money off of these women because, generally speaking, it's agreed that they were paid about 40 cents on the dollar compared to the men if they'd had the same job. And so I think a great number of these shipping companies and steel facilities, et cetera, were quite content to have women stay on, at least for a certain period of time, because they're making so much more money and with these reduced labor costs. But nevertheless, this was just a staggeringly important event in the legacy of female empowerment and their ability to feel like they could stand on their own. And many of them learned for the first time that they can do anything men can do, and sometimes they can even do it better. So I don't know. It's just I came across some history in passing about Rosie the Riveter, and then as I dove into her, I realized there was a whole bunch about this depiction that I hadn't learned about before. So I thought I'd turn it into a story. So
That is so cool. No, I never knew any of this. I just, I thought that Rosie the Riveter was just like a general term that was applied to various representations of women who were on the assembly lines. I
yeah,
don't think I knew that there was a specific Rosie the Riveter.
well,
Yeah,
that Rockwell painting was actually called that, but there were a
right.
ton of other. There was Wendy the welder. There was Josephine the plumber later on.
Oh,
There
sure.
was
Yeah, I remember her. Yeah.
there was a very concerted effort to encourage women to take on these roles, and then I think some men probably rued the day they had done that. It's like, oh, now we want you to go home and go back to the things you used to do, but in terms of empowerment and really breathing life into women and their quality of life and their, I don't know, their their empowerment, their sense of worth, their belief in themselves and their ability to contribute. I think it's just, super interesting.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. That was a great story. Very cool.
Thank you.
And I hate to leave it because we're going to go from the sublime to the ridiculous with my section, but first we have to do something, don't we?
We have a curse word. Oh yeah, so for the second or third time only, the curse word is coming from you.
That's right.
All right, here you go.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
Bryan,
What's you got for me?
This is a phrase, and we've talked about this off mic before. The phrase is the right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. You remember talking about this before?
The right.
So,
no, I don't.
The right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. The first place I heard this, the only place I've heard this, is from Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK. It was spoken by a character called Dino Andrews, a New Orleans attorney played by John Candy. And he speaks in a beatnik-ish jive kind of talk. He says words like daddy-o and we're thick as molasses pie. And the oyster's shucking you, I'm telling you. And he says at one point that he thinks that the DA, played by Kevin Costner, is mistaken. And he says, you got the right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. And he says that under oath when he's giving testimony. Now, I looked this up, and I cannot find, except for speculation on various message boards, as to what this means. The right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. Does that resonate with you at all, that phrase?
It sounds dimly familiar. I mean, you're barking up the wrong tree is what it means, I think.
Yeah, it does. And I think what he's going with here is that your general assumption is correct. Like, yeah, sure. Let's put it in the terms of a murder case. You're right. The man was murdered. You got the right ta-ta, but you're accusing the wrong person. You got the wrong ho-ho. So your general assumption is correct, but you are off in your specificities of the situation.
Okay, right.
So you're in the right ballpark, but you're not there yet, which is a better way. And it's a much more fun way to say, well, you got the right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. So
I wonder if Candy just riffed that.
He very well could have. I mean,
Right,
he came
right.
out of an improvisatory background, right? With some of his stuff that they do with SCTV and everything. He might have, I don't know. But it's a great phrase, and I've loved it ever since I've heard it. And it's really important because with part one of my story on Florrie Fisher, we heard a little bit of that kind of jive beatnik kind of talk when she talked about her sinewy swinger, her zoot suitor. And it strikes me as something that Florrie Fisher would have said. Brother, you got the right ta-ta, but the wrong ho-ho. So that's going to lead us back into my story, which is Florrie Fisher Part 2. And if you haven't heard Florrie Fisher Part 1, just know that this woman has done a mountain of drugs by the time we pick up with the story. And she's been arrested many, many times.
For drugs and for prostitution.
That's right. So we're picking up with Florrie at this point moved back to New York to be with her Davy, her sinewy swinger, her zoot-suited suitor. Florrie convinced her parents and her in-laws that she worked in, quote, public relations, arranging meetings and keeping businessmen happy, which Florrie figured wasn't terribly untrue. She and Davy leased a beautiful apartment on 57th Street, right off of Central Park West. The apartment was owned by a call girl they both knew. It was right around the corner from Carnegie Hall, a few jazz clubs. It had views of Columbus Circle and the southwestern corner of Central Park. It also came with 24-hour police surveillance and bugged telephones. The first night when Florrie invited her father over, the police busted in and arrested her for prostitution and accused her father of being her trick. She screamed that he was her dad, and one of the cops quipped, yeah, your sugar daddy. So she managed to get off from this, but not long after, Davy, Florrie, and Jackie, one of the wives-in-law, you remember that term from last time, that
sure.
Davy assigned his stable of call girls. The three of them got busted for narcotics. It's Florrie's first drug arrest, but Davy, who is known to the cops now as the mustached pimp, which I really like, and Jackie have much more impressive records. Davy gets sentenced to a year plus 1 day, and Jackie is sent to Lexington, which is a rehab correctional facility for folks with really bad drug problems. Not long after Davy's arrest, Florrie is busted yet again with another wife-in-law named Mickey, and their latest drug dealer, a fellow named Carmine. And once again, Florrie's record is better than either of her fellow arrestees, so she thinks she's in the high cotton. Mickey is sentenced to 60 days in the house of detention, and Carmine to a year's at Rikers Island.
Oof.
And you know who could really rattle off the name Rikers really well? Jerry Orbach on Law and Order. Yeah, you're gonna go up to Rikers. Yeah. She calls her parents and confesses that she's a junkie and she needs their help. She never wanted to do this because she hasn't does it. But the arresting detective, a fellow by the name of John Cotoni, who's known as one of the best vice narc detectives in the city, tells her father not to bail her out. And he says, you know what she needs is about 120 days in the house of detention to kick this habit. That's going to solve our problems. Cotoni then testifies in the trial, tells the judge that he suspects Florrie of selling to every junkie in the city. So he goes in and says, she's not only using, she's also a dealer. But the only evidence he has is a needle that was found on the night of the bust, because Carmine was the one found with all of the drugs because it was hidden in his hat band. So here's what Judge Morris Perlman, we have another Morris in the story.
Nice.
Making three, including me, Morris Fisher, Morris Perlman, and your humble narrator, Morris. Judge Morris Perlman says, if this is what you do with a college degree and your good upbringing, I think you need rehabilitation. I'm going to see that you get it. And he sentences her something called pen in def, INDEF, indefinite, which is slightly more than the 120 days Detective Cotoni pushed her to her father. She will spend no less than 1 year and no more than 3 years at the house of detention. A little bit more than the 120 days they wanted. Florrie serves 20 months. Her quote about this is the following. I had a bachelor's degree from college, but I got my master's from the house of detention. My doctorate was earned at Bedford, New York, and Rayford, Florida. She began her sentence on December 8th, 1944. And Bryan, just so you know, I checked. She did not hold either a master's degree or a doctorate, just so you know.
Okay.
She didn't have that, yeah. And while at the house of detention, she worked up various scams for narcotics and money. One of the things she would do is she would buy the place of alcoholics for $1 in line for the titration treatment. So what they would do with the junkies, they'd line them up, and rather than give them a full shot of heroin, they'd give them like 3/4 a shot of heroin. So she would buy their places in line, get a 3/4 shot, then go back through the line again, get another shot of heroin, buy another place in line, go back. So instead of getting 3/4 of a shot, she'd get 2 1/4 shots. So she'd be high as a kite. And she would do this, pretty much every week. She would steal supplies from the kitchen, make late night sandwiches to sell after hours to the girls in the cells.
Right.
She made a special triple decker that involved mayonnaise, roast beef, chicken, and I think peanut butter. She would buy inhalers from the guards, and what they would do is they would tear out the benzodrine strips, which would get you pretty amped up.
Sure.
Described as kind of like cocaine. And benzodrine strips, there were cardboard centers in these things, and so the girls would tear them out and chew them like chewing gum, and sometimes swallow them, and that would get them really amped up. So it was an upper.
Wait, what year is this?
This would be 44. Yeah.
God, okay.
44, 45. She's released August 6, 1946, into the custody of her parents, with her federal case still pending. So her dad, Morris Fisher, writes to the federal district court with an offer. If the federal case is lowered to probation, the Fishers will take their daughter to Florida, and she can do her probation time there. Everyone in New York's entire legal system, city, state, and federal, breathes a huge sigh of relief. Florrie is given federal probation to be served concurrently with city parole, provided she leaves New York immediately. And I really hope that Morris Fisher and Morris Perlman had a long talk, and that conversation was turned into a play called Morris to Morris at some point, along the lines of like Waiting for Godot or Frost Nixon or I'm Not Rappaport. Maybe a late 60s, early 70s sitcom, Morris to Morris, and they form some kind of detective agency.
Right.
Anyway, there's not enough Morris, is what I'm trying to say. The Fishers spend 3 days on the road with their daughter. She goes through withdrawals on the road, which you can imagine what a road trip that would be, all the way from New York to Miami. Once there, she has an emergency surgery to remove an abscess, which she says, quote, was the size of a newborn baby. She claims it formed from all of the benzodrine-soaked cardboard she consumed while in the house of detention. You all right? He compares it to how an oyster makes a pearl by starting with a grain of sand. Quote,
God.
but that was no pearl in my belly. It was a choker. I was assured by a doctor that that's not how that probably happened. Florrie confessed just before the surgery she was being put under that she was a junkie, because if she hadn't, the tiny amount of morphine they used wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have knocked her out. So once surgery started, she probably would have got into shock once they started cutting into her. She talks them into sending her to Lexington, where the wife-in-law Jackie went earlier. She leaves the hospital and immediately lies to her parents, saying that Lexington was just a suggestion and that the reason she had complications during anesthesia was that she still had dope in her system from years of use, even though she'd been completely clean since she arrived in Miami, which was a total lie. She had not been clean in the short time she'd been in Miami. In November of 1947 in Miami, she's arrested for an astonishing 285 forged prescriptions in the Miami area and sentenced to 1 year at Rayford.
Damn.
1 year. As Florrie tells it, the judge, in a front page story from the Miami Herald, I did not have time to look this up, I wish I could have, was quoted as saying that she, Florrie, was shooting so much dope she couldn't have possibly lived another 6 months. So he sentenced her to a year to save her life.
Right.
Assuming she wouldn't be able to get dope inside. Florrie describes Rayford as, quote, rotten, and a place where she saw, quote, things that still make my skin crawl. In the late 1940s, there were offenders as young as 13 years of age locked in with hardened criminals. Both men and women were housed at Rayford, and stories of the various crimes were legendary, quoting Florrie again. I never heard of some of the crimes these crazy people were there for until I came south. Like over the men's side, they had guys there in for sexual intercourse with sheep and chickens. One of these nuts once told me he had been lucky. He got caught making it with a goat, but the judge had let him go when he explained with a straight face that the goat belonged to him. The stupid bastard turned around and did it again within 2 months, but this time with somebody else's goat. That landed him in Rayford. Although I could never see any difference. To me, a goat's a goat. Florrie, of course, immediately tried to figure out how to get drugs into Rayford. She started romancing one of the prison's doctors for narcotics. In addition to her KP duties and gardening job, she also found time to finally get divorced from Davy long distance, as he would not leave Florrie's wives-in-law in New York City to come to visit her down south. By and large, she stays out of trouble at Rayford, with the exception of a couple of grueling sessions in the sweat box, an aluminum structure both too short to stand up in and lie down in. You might remember these if you've ever seen Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman. Mm-hmm. They put them at 30 days in the box, that kind of stuff. At the end of her stay in Rayford, an investigation uncovers a $28,000 shortage of narcotic supplies in the prison hospital. The prison doctor, who had been Florrie's connection and her part-time lover, would have been questioned, but in another offhand revelation, Florrie tells us simply he committed suicide. Florrie turned 30 the day before her release from Rayford on September 19th, 1948. She immediately returns to New York, where on December 16th, she starts a 1-year term for shoplifting. She returns to the house of detention. This small stretch is uneventful, and she's released a couple of months early after a 10-month stay in October of 1949. But by Thanksgiving of the same year, she's back, this time on a narcotics charge. And for the next 13 years, this pattern continues. 30 days here, 90 days there, another 30 days.
In and out, right.
Yep. She also has a horrifying story of a back alley abortion. And it is where the narrative takes this sudden just swerve into the realities, the kind of life she's leading. And the abortion section is just absolutely horrific. And it does not go well, as you might imagine. So she has to go to a hospital for real treatment. And while she's there, the doctors discover a growth on one of her ovaries, which she promptly ignores and leaves the hospital against medical advice. And the dark turn continues because she ends up going back into jail, where she has a graphic description of a young girl who is the victim of prison rape. She describes that, and she describes the whole rape system that goes on in women's prison. But it's all narrated in her deadpan style. I mean, it is just factual like, and it goes from being a funny deadpan style to a Jesus Christ, what am I reading kind of style.
Right.
So this was all at Bedford. And after 2 years at Bedford in New York, that's where she got her doctoral degree, if you remember, the lure of Florida is too great. So Florrie's dad gets her a real job in an attorney's office. During this Miami stay, Florrie meets a fellow by the name of Danny Orenstein. Danny was originally from New Jersey and worked as a credit collector in Miami. He's also into jazz, and soon he's into Florrie as well. And they begin seriously dating and bonding over their shared love of heroin.
Heroin. I was going to guess either meth or heroin.
They managed to hold things together long enough to get married October 16th, 1955. The next night, they're both arrested after a doctor calls in Florrie's suspicious behavior while he's examining her abdominal pain caused by that ovarian cyst that she didn't have removed years before at the hospital.
Oof.
The police find the newlyweds' drug kits. Danny's sentenced to only a year at Rayford, and Florrie, whose record is much, much worse than his, gets another 4-year sentence at Rayford, Florida.
Shit.
This is where she becomes kind of Florrie the Crusader. Riots at Rayford on the men's side means all of the women get relocated. They get relocated to a place called Lowell. It's a facility some miles away from Rayford. It's a much better building, and Florrie claims that her year or months working for that attorney in Miami, she uses her legal expertise that she's gained to get this female warden that there's there who's a real holy roller. She wants them to pray and all this other stuff.
Right.
Gets her replaced by July of 56 by a guy named Harvey D. West, whose main manager of the prison is a guy named, swear to God, his name is Buster Q. Black. And he is a real racist piece of shit. He doesn't like blacks. He especially doesn't like, at some point, Florrie crosses him. And so he decides he doesn't like Jewish people at once. And at one point, Florrie claims to have spent 67 straight days in the sweat box. Ugh. 67 straight days in a box where it's too short to lie down in, too short to stand up in. And all I got to say is that makes Steve McQueen from The Great Escape look like a wimp. Buster also forces Florrie to witness an execution, which I imagine was horrific. She eventually gets out of Rayford, and guess where she goes from there, from Florida?
California.
She goes back to New York. She lives in New Jersey. Because despite being away for years, everyone still knows her. All the dealers she screwed over, the cops on the street, store detectives where she did her shoplifting. Danny and Florrie drift apart as Florrie slides back into sex work. It's now the early 60s. Florrie's in her 40s, and she's up to a $185 day a habit.
Shit.
That's in 1960, early 60s right. Money.
That's 60 years ago.
In 1963, while leaving the house of detention on another sentence, she's arrested as she's literally leaving the building because she stops off in a phone booth inside the lobby of the house of detention to shoot heroin, where a guard sees her doing it. And finally, she thinks, hey, maybe I've hit rock bottom. I would say, yes, Florrie. Yes, you have.
And you started digging, right?
After this arrest, for real this time, she really wants to get cleaned up. So she seeks acceptance into a program called Synanon in Malibu, California. So you're right. She eventually goes to California. Have you heard of Synanon? I can tell by the look on your face.
I've heard. Yeah, I know the broad strokes of Synanon, but not much.
We need to do an episode on Synanon, but briefly, it's a program run by addicts for addicts. It's founded by a guy named Chuck Diedrich in 1958. It began as a 2-year residential program, but somewhere along the way, Diedrich figured out that you're never really cured, so you can't possibly graduate. It became a, quote, lifestyle rehabilitation community where you are watched 24 hours a day. You had to kick cold turkey. You start off at the bottom doing menial work and work your way up through it, and you get to play the game. You've probably heard about the game, a brutal session whereby you kind of stand in a circle and all the other members get to
They insult
emotionally,
you.
verbally,
Yeah. Right.
and
Yes.
eventually physically assault you. Synanon became the Church of Synanon at some point in the 70s, went through a myriad of legal problems. By the late 70s, early 80s, it's widely considered a cult, at one point called the most dangerous and violent cult in America. It is disbanded in 1991. Despite what Synanon became, lots of folks early in existence claimed it helped them in their addiction recovery. Jazz saxophonist Art Pepper, for example, he was a resident in the late 60s and early 70s. And he was of all the jazz guys who
He's
were
badass. Yeah.
who lost their lives to heroin use. Pepper actually had a comeback in the 70s that was phenomenal. He gets a job working for Synanon. She's working for Synanon, and she's working out of Detroit, Buffalo, and the Rochester, New York area. Even goes back into New York City when she's accused by another Synanon member of taking diet pills, which is verboten. You can't take any kind of medication. She's immediately kicked out. So guess where she goes from there?
New York.
Miami. She goes
One or
back
the
to,
other.
she goes back to Miami to be with her parents because they're getting old now. They're in their 80s and 90s. She wants to care for them in their old age, and she starts to teach at a Montessori school. And she starts to teach at a Hope school. And she starts to receive invitations to speak on the dangers of drug use at high schools in the Miami area. She also appears on a couple of nationally syndicated television programs like The Mike Douglas Show. And this, of course, isn't Michael Douglas, the actor. This is Mike Douglas, the old
Oh yeah.
Phil
I
Donahue
remember him. Yeah,
guy.
sure. Yeah, right. Yeah.
The Mike Douglas Show, a show called Girl Talk, and the David Susskind Show. Bryan, you got your phone there? I'm going to send you a picture. What do you see there, Bryan? Describe that for the listeners.
So this must be Florrie.
Mm-hmm. That's Florrie.
Maybe doing a press conference, doing a little curtain background behind her, a couple microphones in front of her, wearing sort of this plain Jane beige top.
Mm-hmm. Lots of beige.
Short,
it's the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. Short hair. Kind of a yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Her television spots lead to many letters from viewers, including one from an old friend from her New York days named Phil Bacalad. Sometimes it's spelled Bacalad with all A's. After a correspondence and a reunion, Phil becomes Florrie's fourth and final husband. That's who she marries. Mm-hmm. One of Florrie lectures to a high school audience was produced as a PSA released in 1970 called The Trip Back. It's available on YouTube, and I used it as a source for this story. Florrie Fisher Bacalad died May 26, 1972, not long after she released this PSA at the age of 54 in Miami, Florida. Causes of death were liver cancer, kidney failure, and cardiac arrest. Right. She's lucky she made it to 54. There were some rumors out there that she made it, she lived until the 80s and that she kind of relapsed a little bit, but she went back out west, was living in Montana. But as near as I can tell, she did die in 1972. The PSA, The Trip Back, has to be seen to be believed. Florrie builds up steam, and by the time she gets to the story, and I cannot do it justice, and I don't play any of the audio for it because I want you to go see it for yourself, but she gets to the story, and it basically starts with, and I'm going to quote her here, "This one time I had to have a laminectomy. My doctor was the same one who operated on James Mansfield's son, Zoltan, that time that he got bit by a lion." And she's just assuming that everybody knows what the hell she's talking about. So I had to look up what a laminectomy was. I had to, it's a spinal surgery. And of course, I knew who Jane Mansfield was. And her son, Zoltan, was indeed bitten by a lion. But by the time she gets to that story, she is off to the races. She's gesturing wildly. She's puffing away on cigarette after cigarette. She's surrounded by these teenagers who are alternately amused, bored, and some of them look absolutely terrified by this elf of a woman telling these horror stories. She's absolutely convinced through her personal anecdotal evidence only that marijuana use will lead to harder drugs and a life of addiction and prostitution and probably death. She doesn't use statistics. She doesn't give a damn about statistics. And one of the students in a Q&A session says, "You're being overly general here. You're assuming a lot of things about us. What, I'm telling you, it's going to happen." And that's kind of the refrain that she uses.
Right, sure.
But I firmly believe that her heart's in the right place. I want to point that out. I'm not making fun of her for that. I think she really wants to help kids. Some Florrieisms that didn't fit into the story. She uses a phrase called single header, and double header. A single header is when you contract either syphilis or gonorrhea. A double header is when you have both of those at the same time. She once described pulling she didn't call it this, but I am. She pulled a Sid Vicious, and she didn't want to come out of the stall to get water to shoot up with, so she could take care of, so she could heat up her heroin. So she used
toilet water,
toilet bowl water to shoot up. But unlike Sid, she would flush first. Sid, there's an old rumor about Sid not flushing at a party, and David Bowie and Lou Reed were like, "He's not going to last long." She liked to imagine that her mother would often say, "My daughter's a junkie, but she eats well." At one point, she lied to her mother about having cancer in her arm. She claimed she got it from a tumor that formed because she once bumped her arm really hard in an accident. In her PSA, she makes this claim that she knew several people, I believe it was 6, who committed murder while under the influence of marijuana or because their drug use started with marijuana. They all died in the electric chair. She uses the word, and I love this word. She uses the word moxie a lot. She had to carry a card with her in later life at all times, which read, "In case of emergency for intravenous, do cut down immediately. Reason, all veins collapsed." And then it was signed by a doctor in San Francisco. We talked about a cut down procedure before.
Exactly.
We were talking
sure.
about the thing. You had to do an immediate cut down with her. I'm going to send you a second picture now. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know who that is?
Oh my God.
Who's
Yes,
that?
that's Amy Sedaris in Strangers with Candy, who looks eerily like Florrie.
Florrie's greatest contribution to pop culture was forever cemented in Strangers with Candy, a Comedy Central program running for 3 seasons beginning in 1999, starring Amy Sedaris, Stephen Colbert, Paul Dinello, and Greg Holloman. Florrie's mannerisms, look, appearance, and general attitude about life were all based on Florrie Fisher. Amy Sedaris credits for that. There are multiple things on YouTube available with Amy talking about how she got a hold of one of the trip back. All of that is based on Florrie Fisher. A lot of the lines in Strangers with Candy are taken directly from her PSA or from the book.
Oh, wow.
Like the one where she comes in late for class and said, "I'm sorry I'm late. I was having my uterus scraped. I brought a note." And Stephen Colbert says, "I read the note. We all read the note." But her character, Jerry Blank, is based almost entirely on the late Florrie Fisher. She is what you can call an American character. So there you have it. Florrie Fisher Part 2. Seek out her video, The Trip Back, if you just want to check it out. Sources for this were her book from 1971, which was released just the year before she died, Florrie Fisher's Lonely Trip Back, as told to Gene Davis and Todd Persons from Bantam Books. Could you imagine being the two people transcribing this and rewriting it? I mean, Gene sits
There's no way
there
this is true. There's no way this is true. There's no way this is true.
She's pulling off her feet. She's pulling off her shoes and rubbing her feet. And she says, "Todd, honey, you know what I'd like to do right now?" And Todd's like, he's loosening his tie. "Heroin? Absolutely. Let's go." The Trip Back PSA from 1970, which is available on YouTube. A great website called For the Love of Florrie, where people talk all about Florrie Fisher. And then Wikipedia for basic information on Synanon, Rayford and Bedford, and the House of Detention, and more information about those. So, true American character, Florrie Fisher. I really think that she, in her later years, was trying to make the world a better place. But boy, what a character! What an exhausting person to be around.
Very cool. I'm surprised and almost embarrassed. I've never heard of her before. Yeah, that's awesome. This week, Dream Idiots does feminism. No, or something. I don't know.
Well, she. I guess what you can say about it's kind of like what what Hunter S. Thompson said about Carlos Zeta Acosta. She stomped on the terra. You know, she was out there in the world. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes, indeed. All right, that's friggin' hilarious. Thanks, great job. I was dying to hear part two after part one, and I promise I didn't look up anything. I was tempted to, but didn't.
Well,
I did no googling.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for not ruining that surprise for you. It was a Christmas miracle.
And that is the story of Jesus. All right. Merry Christmas, folks. Thanks for listening and thanks for doing those things. Please share these episodes with folks. If you have a friend that you think would like our particular brand of stupidity, please share with friends and family and whoever you think might need a laugh. We're a big fan of not doing any heavy lifting or hard thinking here, and so hopefully you're enjoying our work.
That's right. That's right. And Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and as always, be good to each other. Thanks.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong,
Mhm.
Bryan.
Bong bong
Bong bong.
bong bong. Good.